At 4:17 a.m., the Central Armed Forces Museum sat under a fragile calm in the heart of Moscow. Suddenly, waves of Ukrainian drones, TE 72 seconds, Su 255 seconds, and armored infantry struck in flawless coordination. Kamikaze drones tore across the sky, opening corridors as tanks pushed up from subterranean routes above. Strike jets screamed low at barely 500 FT, releasing guided missiles into the outer defenses. This was no ordinary assault. It was a calculated blow at Russia's military core, breaking the notion that Moscow was safe. In seconds, silence turned into fire and disorder. Don't take your eyes off the screen until the secret is revealed. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about this battle in the comments section. Thank you for watching. The opening strike had barely settled when the first assault phase unfolded with ruthless accuracy. Ukrainian kamikaze drones swarmed low over the Central Armed Forces Museum, their warheads erupting with thunderous cracks that blinded Russian sensors. Radar screens inside the command post flickered and went dark, giving the attackers a narrow window of advantage. Into that gap, autonomous mine-laying robots crawled across the stone plaza, slipping between shattered barricades and embedding explosives in precise patterns. Within seconds, the square converted into a lethal funnel designed to trap any Russian reinforcements. From the east, mechanized infantry on armored carriers surged forward, backed by the roar of heavy artillery. Batteries of BM-27 Oregon and BM-30 Smerchich unleashed full barrages, their rockets screaming through the night sky before slamming into the outer perimeter. Concrete walls splintered, watchtowers collapsed, and the defensive line cracked under the sheer force of firepower. Panicked Russian commanders scrambled to react, activating the S-350 air defense batteries hidden within Moscow streets. The launchers blazed to life, spitting missiles skyward, but the sheer number of drones and rockets saturated their targeting systems. Confusion spread through the Russian network as missiles misfired, some detonating early, others streaking uselessly into the dark. In less than 15 minutes, what had been a fortified monument had become a shattered battlefield. The calm of 4:17 a.m. was gone, replaced by smoke, flame, and the relentless cadence of a campaign meant to sever Moscow's defenses at their core. The chaos, unleashed by the initial Ukrainian assault, had barely faded when Russia struck back with a sudden and massive counter. Only 12 minutes after the BM-27 seconds and BMG-30 seconds ripped the outer defenses, the distant rumble of engines filled the western sky. Out of the haze, squadrons of Su-34 Russia versus Ukraine warfighter bombers dove from high altitude, dropping precision-guided bombs that struck Ukrainian tank formations maneuvering through the shattered plaza. At the same time, the deep rolling thunder of Tuesday 95 bombers echoed overhead, their huge silhouettes launching volleys of K-55 and CH-101 cruise missiles from nearly 1,500 miles out, streaking toward the city center like fiery spears. On the ground, Russian snipers armed with Dragunovs took positions on rooftops around the museum. From high vantage points some over 200 feet above street level, they formed overlapping fields of fire, cutting down advancing infantry and forcing Ukrainian units to scatter into cover. Every shattered window and rooftop became a kill zone, the defenders turning Moscow's buildings into a web of lethal crossfire. At street level, Ukrainian armor pushed forward but suddenly faced fierce opposition. Russian artillery batteries hidden in the shade of government buildings opened up with relentless barrages. Shells rained with deadly accuracy, forcing T-72 seconds and T-80 seconds to abandon their planned courses. Applause. One Ukrainian column was trapped against a collapsed overpass. Its advance stalled under continuous pounding from 152-meter rounds overhead. The fight escalated into a lethal contest of speed and response. Ukrainian Su, 255 seconds, and Su negative, 30 seconds scrambled to intercept the incoming. Russian bombers firing volleys of air-to-air missiles while Russian jets countered with heat-seeking R-73 seconds. The sky turned into a twisting stage of vapor trails and blasts, each side trading strikes in a desperate bid for air superiority. In less than half an hour, the Central Armed Forces Museum had become a crucible of modern conflict. Missiles carving the night, tanks grinding over shattered stone, and soldiers battling block by block beneath the shadows of history's relics. The counterattack had shifted the tide, turning the breakthrough into a brutal endurance test. The Russian counterattack had threatened to reverse the momentum, but Ukraine responded with exactness and cunning. Instead of confronting Moscow's air power directly, Ukrainian commanders changed the rhythm of the fight into one of deception and synchronization. High above the smoke-choked skyline, Su-35 fighters clawed upward, deliberately drawing Russian Su-34 seconds and Su-302s into a swirling duel nearly 30,000 FT above the capital. While dogfights raged in the upper Ukraine war news atmosphere, swarms of small reconnaissance drones slipped low, weaving through alleys and broken streets. Their role was disruption rather than destruction, jamming Russian communications, severing ground-to-air links, and plunging frontline units into isolation. On the ground, Ukrainian mechanized infantry advanced carefully behind cover, supported by scout robots fitted with cameras and sensors. These unmanned systems crawled over debris and pierced side passages, feeding live intelligence to armored crews. With the route cleared, T-90 tanks surged forward, their 125mm guns punching through barricades as they rolled straight toward the museum's main steps. Each shot shook the plaza, stone facades collapsing in cascades of dust. Russian defenders tried to regroup, but Ukrainian snipers wielding Barrett 050 caliber rifles had taken rooftop positions. One after another, Russian officers were struck at ranges beyond 800 YD, leaving squads without leaders amid the chaos. Without coordination, defensive fire faltered, gaps opened in the perimeter, and panic spread through Moscow's troops. By now, the battle had become a precise choreography of timing. Ukrainian ground forces advanced not in blind waves, but in measured pushes. Every move shielded by drones delivering electronic warfare. Every corner secured by exacting sniper fire. The earlier fury of Russian artillery now seemed scattered, unable to lock on through the haze of smoke and disrupted signals. In less than an hour, Ukraine had converted Moscow's furious counter into confusion. The once firm lines around the Central Armed Forces Museum splintered as T-90 seconds closed to within 200 FT of the museum's front steps, their turrets pivoting slowly, signaling that the heart of Russia's defense was on the verge of being breached. The thunder of Ukrainian T-92s approaching the museum steps forced Moscow into a desperate gamble. Having failed to hold the perimeter with conventional strikes, Russia unleashed its most dreaded weapon, the Kinzhal hypersonic missile. Launched from well outside the city, the missile screamed in at over 6,000 km, targeting Ukrainian armor massed in the plaza. For a moment, it seemed certain the strike would end the assault in a single blinding blast. But Ukrainian commanders had foreseen such a move. Even as the Su-35 seconds kept Russian fighters busy at high altitude, specialized electronic warfare teams activated their counter-Russian war plan. Dozens of signal-mimicking drones took off at low altitude, each broadcasting fake signatures that resembled tanks and troop groupings from barely 300 FT above ground. These drones wove unpredictably across the city grid, scattering false returns across Russian tracking screens. The Kinzhal's guidance hesitated, then swerved, plunging harmlessly into an abandoned industrial area on the city's fringe. At that instant, Ukraine seized the lead. From long-range platforms, volleys of Kh-101 cruise missiles arced in from the east, bypassing the dogfights aloft. Their targets were not the museum itself, but Russian supply hubs hidden in Moscow's outskirts. Explosions ripped through fuel convoys and ammo dumps, flames lighting the night sky for miles. The strike severed lines of resupply, cutting reinforcements off from the embattled defenders inside the capital. The effect was immediate, with resupply points in disarray and their prized hypersonic weapon wasted. Russian forces around the museum stumbled. Ukrainian infantry surged forward once more. Now backed by steady logistics, the plaza trembled beneath the echo of advancing armor, the proud defenses shrinking into pockets of resistance. In less than an hour, the battle had turned into a struggle of extremes. Hypersonic missiles versus decoy drones, strategic bombers versus pinpoint counterstrikes. And in that exchange, Ukraine showed it could not only endure Russia's top weapons, but flip their failures into tactical gains at Moscow's very heart. The failure of the Kinzhal strike and the destruction of Russian depots handed Ukraine the momentum to drive directly into Moscow's defenses. Now came the savage phase of city fighting, the decisive fight for control of the museum grounds. Ukrainian T-92, T-72 seconds and armored carriers pressed in from several directions, their guns thundering at close range. Each 125mm round ripped through stone monuments and bronze statues that lined the plaza. Once emblems of past wars, now crushed into rubble under the weight of a new conflict. The landmarks of Russian military pride had become collateral in a fight for survival. Desperate to stop the assault, Russian crews brought every remaining S-350 launcher online. From hidden positions in nearby streets, the batteries fired rapidly, missiles whining overhead in attempts to thin the incoming drones and armored columns. But the sheer density of engagements overwhelmed the system. Guidance radars overheated. Russia-Ukraine War update reload crews lagged behind. And within minutes, the once potent shield was sputtering, firing aimlessly into the smoke-choked sky. Some missiles detonated prematurely, showering their own defenders with shrapnel. Beneath the plaza, a quieter but just as deadly fight played out. Ukrainian mine-laying robots deployed earlier in the chaos reached preset locations under the museum's sub-alien maintenance tunnels. With synchronized blasts, they collapsed key corridors and service routes, sealing off the underground approaches. Reinforcements trying to reach the museum from adjoining blocks found themselves cut off, blocked by fire and twisted metal. Above ground, the scene turned into a maze of wreckage. Smoke billowed thousands of feet, curling over the Moscow skyline, while flames licked at the museum's facade. The battlefield became a tangle of broken stone, burning vehicles, and craters gouged deep into the square. Ukrainian infantry advanced carefully, threading between debris while snipers picked off Russian gunners still manning nests. The rumble of tank engines mixed with rifle cracks and the boom of collapsing structures, composing a relentless soundtrack of modern war. What had started as a sudden strike at 4:17 a.m. had now morphed into an inferno of urban combat. The Central Armed Forces Museum, once a monument to Russia's military past, stood consumed by fire and steel, a stage for a battle no longer about relics, but about the future of the war itself. The inferno that ravaged the plaza in Phase 5 left Russian defenses broken beyond repair. Through plumes of smoke, Ukrainian infantry stormed the Central Armed Forces Museum, clearing hall after hall with disciplined urgency. Display rooms once filled with relics were repurposed as makeshift fortifications. Every shattered exhibit became cover. Russia rushed special forces from the city's outskirts, but their advance stalled against autonomous sniper drones, firing with lethal accuracy from rooftops and alleys. Within minutes, all communications inside the museum fell silent, sealing the collapse of Moscow's defensive hub. With Russian defenses cut off and the museum fully under Ukrainian control, the battle reached its inevitable end. The Central Armed Forces Museum still stood in shape, but its symbolic role as Moscow's military heart was lost. Strategically, Russia lost more than a building. It lost confidence, forced to scatter its command network across the capital. The question now lingers: if Moscow's core can fall, what fortress is truly safe? Ukraine opened lanes for wounded Russians to withdraw, showing this strike targeted systems, not civilians. Above it all, a column of black smoke rose thousands of feet, marking both an ending and a warning. At 4:12 a.m., the Baltic coast near Baltisk lay under a heavy mist, the port lights barely piercing the fog. Without warning, Russian submarines fired heavy torpedoes from beneath the Gulf of Gdansk, while S-400 launchers on shore spun up their radars, locking onto Ukraine's approaching drone flotilla from the west. This was no random clash. It was a full-spectrum battle across sea, air, and land. Baltisk was not just a port. It was the beating heart of Russia's Baltic fleet. In seconds, the calm would shatter and what followed would become a lesson in modern warfare. The first wave hit soon after the Russian torpedoes cut the water. From the western horizon, Ukraine launched a screen of coastal recon drones, their small frames skimming just 150 ft above the sea, charting every radar pulse and heat signature around Baltisk. Beneath them, unmanned surface vessels USVs crept forward at barely 25 meters, hugging the waves as they closed to within 3 mi of the harbor mouth. Above, FPV drones darted in erratic patterns, while long-range UAVs at 12,000 ft projected decoy returns, creating a corridor of false echoes across Russian radar scopes. Baltisk's defenders reacted fast. A Strachey-class corvette moored less than 900 ft from the main pier powered up and brought its deck guns to bear. From the shoreline, a Panzer S-1 battery rolled forward, its twin 30mm guns and 12 missile tubes tracking the incoming swarms. Warning sirens echoed through the harbor, and radar operators reported multiple contacts converging on the area. What Ukraine had started was not yet the final strike, but the opening probe. By forcing Russia to light up its defenses, naval, ground, and radar, the Ukrainian drones were mapping every blind spot, every angle of fire, and every reaction time. Baltisk, the fortress port of the Baltic fleet, was now fully awake, its defenses burning power and ammunition at a tempo Ukraine had calculated from the start. Applause. The probing strikes had forced Baltisk's defenders to fully disclose themselves. But Ukraine's real move was only beginning. Minutes after the first wave of recon drones and USVs triggered the alarm, a second formation appeared low over the Baltic waters. Flying barely 200 FT above the waves, dozens of kamikaze drones raced forward in a wide arc, their engines buzzing like a hive of wasps. To Russian radar operators, this looked like the main assault. Fast, direct, and deadly. The reaction was immediate. S-400 launchers east of the port pivoted their tubes skyward and launched interceptors. Streaks of fire shredded the dawn sky, covering distances of 30 meters in seconds. From within Baltisk itself, Bu M3 batteries engaged, their missiles climbing rapidly to meet the low-flying drones. Music radar screens flooded with tracks, icons flashing red as operators struggled to sort real threats from decoys. Every available defensive system burned through ammo, and the entire harbor echoed with the roar of engines and missile launches. Out at sea, hidden beyond the 12-mile line, Ukrainian patrol vessels executed the second phase of the trap. From their rails came Kh-31P anti-radiation missiles, skimming at Mach 2 toward the glowing Russian radars. The moment Russian operators switched to full-power scanning, they became targets. Within minutes, the air defense net that once seemed impenetrable was under strain. Radars flickering as crews shifted frequencies or went dark to avoid strikes. By the time the first wave of kamikaze drones detonated against the outer defenses, the true purpose of the sacrifice was clear. Many small UAVs were shredded by missiles or gunfire, but each one forced Russia's systems to spend precious interceptors. Each one carved seconds of distraction into the defensive cadence. Behind the smoke and wreckage, the radar grid now carried gaps, blind corridors where Ukrainian strike assets could slip through unseen. Baltisk's garrison had won the surface exchange, downing wave after wave of drones. But they had paid a hidden toll. The air defense network was stretched, its crews exhausted, its interceptors spent. In the darkness beyond the horizon, Ukrainian crews watched radar flickers grow erratic. The fortress port had survived the opening blows, but its shield was cracked. And through those cracks, the next strike was already closing in. The smoke of intercepted drones still lingered over Baltisk when the battle shifted beneath the waves. Russia, unwilling to let the port's defenses be shaped by swarming UAVs, committed one of its most dangerous assets, a Kilo-class submarine lurking just outside the harbor perimeter. Silent and deep in the water, the diesel-electric vessel adjusted its bearing and fired two heavyweight torpedoes, each more than 20 FT long and racing at over 50 mph, aimed straight at the Ukrainian USV formation, probing the coastline. For a moment, it seemed the sea itself had become a weapon. The torpedoes churned white trails through the black water, closing toward the unmanned craft. But Ukraine had foreseen this counter. Small escort boats less than 150 FT in length had been trailing the USVs, towing specialized sonar nets to create a distorted acoustic picture. Alongside them, underwater drones released bursts of synthetic noise, imitating engine signatures and propeller cavitation. To the Russian fire control computers, the sea lit up with dozens of false echoes. The torpedoes veered, chasing phantom targets into open water, detonating harmlessly in distant spray. The respite was brief. The Kilo class, now rising to periscope depth for a clearer view, exposed itself at the wrong moment. One Ukrainian USV carrying a warhead near 400 lb broke formation and accelerated. Skimming over the chop at 40 km in pace, it headed straight for the faint silhouette showing on the surface. Russian sailors ashore spotted it only seconds before impact. The explosion came with a thunderous crack, a column of seawater blasting skyward as the drone slammed into the submarine's forward hull. The shockwave rippled across the harbor, rattling windows along the piers and sending vibrations through the port steel. For an instant, the entire waterfront seemed to convulse. In Baltisk's command posts, alarms multiplied. What began as a drone diversion had dragged the fleet's undersea assets into open combat. The harbor's defenders were forced to split attention, missiles and radars scanning the skies, while sonar operators strained to find the next underwater threat. The message was clear. Ukraine was not just contesting Russia in the air or on the surface. It was challenging every layer of the battle space. And by striking a submarine within sight of its own fortress port, Kyiv had shown that even the silent hunters of the Baltic were not safe. Baltisk's defenders had absorbed the blow, but the underwater battlefield had already shifted against them. The blast from the crippled submarine still echoed across the harbor when the battle shot skyward. With Russian defenses reeling from the undersea hit, Ukraine launched its boldest wave yet. From the western horizon, Barakar TB2 drones swept forward at 18,000 FT, their wings flashing faintly against the morning haze. Each carried advanced targeting pods relaying coordinates live to strike aircraft waiting beyond the radar line. Moments later, the deep roar of Ukrainian Su-24 bombers rolled across the Baltic air, launching Storm Shadow cruise missiles that strode over the waves at nearly 600 mm. The first Storm Shadows cut in from the north, hugging the sea surface before climbing suddenly toward the coastline. Their targets were clear: hardened fuel depots and command bunkers around Baltisk's piers. Simultaneously, swarms of kamikaze drones dived toward the harbor from multiple bearings. One group plunged at a fuel storage site less than 200 FT from the main pier, while others angled for radar stations and parked vehicles. The aim was saturation. Too many threats from too many directions for Russia's defenders to intercept all at once. The response from Kaliningrad was immediate. Russian air controllers scrambled Su-27 fighters from Chkalovsk Air Base, less than 20 meters inland. Within minutes, the jets were roaring overhead, afterburners cutting through the low clouds, climbing to intercept the intruding TB-2 Second and Storm Shadows. Contrails twisted into the sky as air-to-air missiles streaked across the battle space, exploding into bursts of fire. The fight that followed was chaotic, an aerial melee layered directly above the smoking port. Ukrainian drones tried evasive moves, diving and climbing in erratic arcs. Their electronic warfare modules spat jamming bursts across Russian bands. Storm Shadows flying autonomously altered course mid-flight to avoid interception, skimming just 100 FT above rooftops as they closed. Below, Panzer S-1 units fired volley after volley, tracers stabbing into the sky while Bau M3 missiles chased shadows across the radar grid. Despite the ferocity of the defense, at least one kamikaze drone penetrated. It slammed into the flank of a massive oil tank near the pier. The detonation thundered across Baltisk, sending a column of flame hundreds of feet high, black smoke curling like a beacon to the whole Baltic Sea. Fire crews rushed, but secondary blasts followed as pipelines and storage drums ignited in sequence. Overhead, the dogfight continued. Ukrainian TB-2 Second kept providing targeting even as Russian Su-27 Second scored kills, knocking several from the sky. Yet every second a fighter spent dueling drones meant another Storm Shadow slipped closer. For Baltisk's defenders, the nightmare was unfolding. While they battled above the harbor, the real danger raced at wave-top level, unseen until the final moments. In this phase, the port was no longer just under attack. It had become the center of a three-dimensional battlefield where steel, fire, and sky collided in the most volatile strike yet. The air above Baltisk was chaos, and in that chaos, Ukraine pressed its advantage. The skies above Baltisk were still lit with missile trails and burning drones when the decisive strike unfolded below. With Russia's air defenses fully engaged against Storm Shadows and kamikaze UAVs, a new threat crept silently from the north. It was a low-profile Ukrainian USV, its hull coated with radar-absorbing panels and running nearly invisible at less than 5 ft above the waterline. Packed with nearly 1,000 lbs of explosives, it pushed forward at 35 mm/h, slipping past coastal radars distracted by the aerial battle overhead. The timing was no accident. As the USV closed within 800 FT of the northern pier, a coordinated dive began in the sky. Ukrainian UAVs plunged toward a Staragushi-class corvette moored at the dock, their warheads slamming into its superstructure in near-simultaneous strikes. Flames erupted from the deck, the ship's own ammunition cooking off in violent bursts. Even as the corvette's crew scrambled to contain the fires, the true killing blow was seconds away. At precisely 4:37 a.m., the USV made contact. It drove headlong into the reinforced pier wall beneath the main warehouse complex. The explosion ripped through the harbor with a blast wave strong enough to shatter windows a half-mile inlet. The pier steel supports buckled instantly, cranes toppled into the water, and the shock tore open nearby fuel tanks. Fire roared upward, igniting the already damaged corvette and spreading across the dockyard. Within moments, a chain reaction began. Secondary explosions rolled through ammunition bunkers and fuel depots, each detonation feeding the next. Towers of flame rose hundreds of feet into the sky, painting the Baltic horizon in searing orange. Entire sections of Baltisk's waterfront were engulfed, warehouses collapsing as shockwaves rippled outward. What had started as a probing drone assault had now escalated into the unthinkable. The heart of Russia's Baltic fleet was burning from within. Baltisk was no longer just a fortress under siege. It was a port consumed by fire. The inferno at Baltisk raged on, flames leaping hundreds of feet into the night sky. When the echoes of the last detonation began to fade, amid the collapsing warehouses and burning ships, Ukrainian reconnaissance UAVs circled quietly overhead. their cameras capturing the devastation below. Through the smoke and shattered steel, small groups of Russian sailors could be seen crawling across the pier, some clutching wounds, others dazed by the shockwave. The fortress port was broken, but the men lying amid the wreckage were no longer combatants. They were survivors. Then came an unexpected act. From one of the hovering drones, small containers began to drop, guided by parachutes toward the ruined pier. Inside were medical kits, bandages, tourniquets, and morphine injectors meant not for Ukrainian fighters, but for the wounded Russians scattered among the debris. Over the drone's encrypted channel, a simple message was transmitted. We strike to end the war, not to strip men of their dignity. For a moment, the chaos of battle seemed to pause, even as fires raged and secondary blasts echoed in the distance. The sight of medical supplies drifting down through the smoke painted a stark contrast, destruction and mercy coexisting in the same sky.